The key was cold. Not just cool the way metal gets when you leave it on a counter overnight. This was a deeper cold, a biting cold. The kind of cold that crawls up through your fingers and settles somewhere behind your ribs and refuses to leave. It was an old skeleton key, iron by the weight of it, rusted along the teeth, ornate at the bow with a small twist of metal that might have been pretty once back when somebody cared enough to polish it. Now it just looked tired, tired and forgotten, like everything else that had been handed down to me in 18 years of living. Diane dropped it into my open palm without ceremony, without warmth, without even looking at me really. She had the same expression she wore when she scraped leftovers into the dog's bowl, a small flick of the wrist, a small twist of the mouth, and then it was done. Happy birthday, Silas. Her voice was flat. The words sat in the air between us like two stones dropped into a well that had run dry years ago. I closed my fingers around the key. The teeth bit into my palm. I welcomed the pain. It was something to feel. Diane's nails were long and lacquered red, wet-looking even in the gray afternoon light coming through the kitchen window. She always had her nails done, even when there wasn't grocery money, even when the heating bill was past due, even when Robert was lying in the hospital with tubes in his arms, and the doctor was using words like complicated and we need to discuss next steps. Diane had always made time for her nails. You're 18 now, she said, and her eyes lifted finally, but they didn't land on me. They landed somewhere over my shoulder on the wall behind me, like she was already calculating the square footage I was about to vacate. A man supposedly, the lawyer's letter said you get this on your 18th birthday. Robert, my stepfather, 2 years gone now. 2 years of being the leftover, 2 years of being the line item Diane couldn't quite cross out fast enough. What is it? I asked, and my voice came out cracked. I cleared my throat. I hadn't spoken much in the last few days. Silence had become a kind of armor. The less you said, the less she had to push against. The less she had to push against, the smaller you could make yourself. And the smaller you could make yourself, the easier it was to disappear into the wallpaper of a house that had never really wanted you. It's a key, Diane said. She let out a long, exhausted sigh. The kind of sigh that says, I cannot believe I have to explain this. It's the key to your grandfather's old tool barn, out in Hollow Pine. Hollow Pine, Pennsylvania, some little nothing town up in the hills. The lawyer called last month. Walter Hayes died back in the spring. Apparently he left you the property. Robert was named as your guardian on the paperwork, so the lawyer routed it through me. Lucky me. My grandfather, Walter, my mother's father, I had never met him. Not once. In 18 years on this earth, not once. I had heard his name maybe a dozen times in my life, and most of those times the name had come out of my mother's mouth soft and like a song she was trying to remember, but couldn't quite hold on to. Quiet man, smart man, could fix anything with his hands. That was what she used to say. Then she would get that look in her eyes, that faraway look, and she would change the subject. She died when I was 10. She died slow the way some people do. The sickness took her voice first, then her appetite, then her color, then her light. By the end, she was just a small, breathing shape under a blanket, and I sat next to that shape every day after school until the day came when there was no more breathing. I was 10 years old. I held her hand. It was already cold. After that, there was just Robert. And Robert was a good man. I want to say that because it's true and because I don't have many true things to say about my childhood. Robert was a kind man who married my mother when I was 8, and for 2 short years, we had something that almost looked like a family from the outside. Robert taught me how to throw a baseball. Robert taught me how to shake another man's hand. Robert took me to a hardware store one Saturday when I was 9 and let me pick out my own little hammer, and he carried it home like it was something precious, because to me it was. But when my mother died, Robert died with her. Not in body, in every other way that counts. He kept the lights on and the fridge stocked, but the man who had taught me to throw a baseball was gone. He sat in his recliner most nights and stared at a television that wasn't always turned on. He provided. He didn't connect. His heart had been boarded up like a storm window, and nobody, least of all me, knew the trick to opening it again. He married Diane 4 years after my mother died. I was 14. I think he was tired. I think he wanted somebody in the house to make the silence feel less like a tomb. I don't think he loved her, not the way he had loved my mother, and I think Diane knew that, and I think it sat inside her like a splinter, and slowly over time it turned into something meaner. When Robert had his heart attack 2 years ago, I was 16. He was sitting at the kitchen table drinking his morning coffee looking at the newspaper. He set the cup down. He said, "Huh," just that. "Huh." Then he tipped sideways and was gone before he hit the floor. After that, it was just me and Diane had been counting the days. "There's a bus ticket on the table," she said now, turning her back to me, already walking down the hall. "And $500 cash. That's what Robert set aside for you. That's all of it. The lawyer said the property's basically worthless. There's an open offer from a developer. $4,500 for the whole acre. I'd take it if I were you. It's a lot more than what's in the envelope." "Diane." She didn't stop walking. "Diane, where am I supposed to?" "Hollow Pine, Silas. The bus leaves at 6. You've got 2 hours." She reached her bedroom door. She stepped through it. She closed it behind her, and the lock clicked, and that small mechanical sound was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my life. It was the sound of a door closing on the only home I had ever known. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked somewhere down the hall. Outside, a car went by. I looked down at the key in my hand. I looked at the envelope on the table, white and thin, with my name written across it in Robert's old careful handwriting. He must have written it years ago before he died, and Diane had been holding on to it the way a creditor holds on to a debt. I picked up the envelope. I opened it. Inside were 10 crisp $50 bills and a one-way bus ticket to a town I had never heard of. There was no note, no words from Robert, no "goodbye, son," no "I'm proud of you," no "I tried my best." Just money and a ticket, just the practical bones of a goodbye. I slid the key into my pocket. I picked up the duffel bag at my feet. Everything I owned, a few changes of clothes, a paperback I had read 3 times, a photograph of my mother taken the summer before she got sick, her face turned toward the sun, her smile half-formed. The total weight of Silas Whitman, 18 years old, was 12.5 pounds in a canvas bag. I did not look back. I walked out the front door of the only home I had ever known, and I pulled it shut behind me, and I stepped down off the porch, and I started walking toward the bus station. The afternoon air was thick with exhaust fumes. A siren wailed somewhere far off. Pittsburgh sounded the way it always sounded, loud and indifferent. The key in my pocket felt heavy, heavier than it had any right to be. A worthless barn on a worthless piece of land. That was what Diane had called it. That was what the lawyer had called it. That was what the whole world seemed to agree it was. I should have agreed with them. I should have walked into that bus station, called the lawyer, signed the papers, taken the $4,500, and started a new life with money in my pocket and nothing to weigh me down. That would have been the smart thing. That would have been the easy thing. That is not what I did. The youth shelter was 3 blocks from the bus station, and that is where I went first because 6 o'clock came and went, and I was still standing on the sidewalk staring at the bus that would take me to Hollow Pine, and I could not for the life of me make my feet step onto it. So I slept on a cot for 2 nights. The shelter smelled like bleach and tired men. There were 7 other boys in my room, most of them older, with eyes that had seen things I hadn't seen yet. Nobody spoke much. There was a kind of unwritten rule in places like that. You kept your business in your duffel bag and your duffel bag under your cot, and you didn't ask questions and you didn't answer questions either. On the second morning, my phone rang. It was a blocked number. I almost didn't answer. Something made me answer. "Is this Silas Whitman?" A woman's voice. Crisp, professional, the kind of voice that bills you in 6-minute increments. This is Mr. Whitman, my name is Lorraine Albright. I'm a paralegal with Albright and Associates. I've been handling the final disbursements of your stepfather's estate, and I'm also the local contact for the property your grandfather Walter Hayes left to you. I'm calling to confirm you received the items and information designated for you on your 18th birthday. I got it. Good. And are you aware of the standing offer on the Hollow Pine property? $4,500. Yes, from Ironwood Holdings. Mr. Whitman, I'll be candid with you. I've been doing this work for 12 years. I have seen a lot of inheritances. This is not a good one. The land is zoned non-arable. The structure on the property is listed as dilapidated. The county assessment values the entire parcel at less than $3,800. Frankly, the offer from Ironwood is generous. I'd recommend you take it. I can have the paperwork drawn up by end of day. You sign, we file, the money is wired into an account of your choosing. Clean and simple. She was good. She was fast. She had clearly made this call before, probably to a lot of kids in a lot of bus stations holding a lot of duffel bags. But there was something underneath her voice, something just slightly too smooth, something that sounded less like a paralegal giving advice and more like a woman reading from a script she had been handed. Why do they want it? I asked. A small pause on her end. I'm sorry. This Ironwood company, if the land is worthless, why are they offering $4,500 for it? Developers buy up cheap rural parcels all the time, Mr. Whitman. They assemble them. They wait for zoning changes. Your acre is one small piece of a much larger long-term strategy. It has no special value on its own. Then why do they need my one specific worthless acre? Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Whitman, take the money. I stood there in the lobby of the youth shelter, holding a cheap prepaid phone against my ear, watching a man in a stained jacket eat a bowl of cereal with his hands. And I thought about my grandfather, a man I had never met, a quiet man, a man who could fix anything. A man who had, for some reason I could not begin to understand, left a worthless piece of land to a grandson he had never bothered to know. There was something there. I could not tell you what. I could not tell you why. But there was something there, some small stubborn weight at the bottom of my chest that would not be moved by $4,500. I want to see it first, I said. The line went very quiet. Mr. Whitman, I want to see it, then I'll decide. She let out a small breath, not quite a sigh, something more careful than a sigh. As you wish. The property is 2 miles east of Hollow Pine on Ridge Road. You can't miss it. Call me when you have made your decision. She hung up. I stood there for another minute listening to the dial tone, and then I went back to my cot and I packed my duffel bag and I walked back to the bus station. And this time when 6 o'clock came, I got on the bus. The ride was 6 hours, long enough to watch the city give way to suburbs, and the suburbs give way to farmland, and the farmland give way to forest. The air through the cracked window changed as we drove. It went from gasoline and asphalt to cut grass to damp earth and pine needles. The light changed too. It went from gray to gold to a deep purpling blue as the sun started to fall behind the western hills. I rode with my forehead against the cold glass and watched America roll past me in pieces. Small towns with names like Bear Hollow and Mill Run and Sugar Notch. Places that were nothing but a post office, a feed store, a church, and a stoplight. Old men sitting on porches, boys riding bicycles down the middle of empty streets. The quiet kind of country that the cities have forgotten about. I had never been out of Pittsburgh in my life. The bus driver, a heavy-set man with a gray beard, called out Hollow Pine the way a man calls out the name of a town he doesn't expect anybody to actually want. The brakes hissed. The bus rolled to a stop in front of a small brick diner with a buzzing neon sign that read, Ruth's in red letters, and a smaller sign underneath that read, Open. I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away in a cloud of diesel, and then it was gone, and I was standing on a quiet main street in a town I had never seen. and the silence pressed in on me from every direction. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. A church bell tolled somewhere down the road. Once, twice, 6 times. 6 o'clock in the evening, except the clock on the church tower was running about 4 hours slow because the western sky was already turning the color of a bruise. The main street was 3 blocks long. A hardware store with the lights off, a grocery with a faded awning, a boarded-up movie theater with a marquee that still read in cracked black letters, now showing and nothing else. And at the end of the block, the diner. Ruth's. I went inside because I needed to ask directions and because I had not eaten since the morning, and because the cold of that key in my pocket had started to seep into the rest of me, and I needed a place to thaw out. The bell above the door jingled. A woman behind the counter looked up. She was in her mid-60s, white hair pulled back in a loose knot, a face full of soft lines, the kind that come from years of smiling at strangers. She wore a blue apron over a blue dress, and her eyes were the clear, pale blue of a winter morning. She looked at me. She looked at my duffel bag. She looked at my face. And then something happened that I did not expect. Her hand went to her mouth. "Oh, dear Lord," she said. I stood in the doorway with the bell still jingling above my head, and this woman I had never seen before stared at me like I was a ghost who had walked in off the road. "You're Hannah's boy," she said. It was not a question. It was a fact. She said it the way you say the sun is up or that's a maple tree. A simple, certain fact. I said. She came around the counter. She did not hug me. She did not touch me. She just stood close, looking up at my face, and her clear, pale eyes filled slowly with tears that did not fall. "You've got her eyes," she said. "Lord, help me. You've got her eyes." "I'm looking for the property on Ridge Road, my grandfather's place." "Walter's place," she said softly. "You knew him." She let out a small, watery laugh. "Son, everybody in Hollow Pine knew Walter Hayes." She steered me toward the counter and put me on a stool and poured me a glass of ice water without asking, and then a cup of coffee, and then she set down a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes and green beans, and she said, "On the house." And she turned away before I could say anything because her eyes were doing that thing again. I ate. I had not realized how hungry I was. I had not realized how cold I was. I had not realized how much I needed somebody to look at me like I was a person and not a problem. She watched me eat from the other end of the counter. After a while, she came back, refilled my coffee, and leaned her elbows on the counter and looked at me for a long, quiet moment. "My name's Ruth," she said. "Silas." "Silas. He used to talk about you. Walter did. Not often. He wasn't a talker. But once in a while, late, when the diner was empty, and he was the last customer, he'd take out this little wallet of his, and he'd show me a picture. A little baby in a blue blanket. He'd say, 'That's Hannah's boy. That's my grandson.' And then he'd put it back in his wallet, and he wouldn't say another word about it for 6 months. I stared down into my coffee. I did not cry. I was not going to cry in a diner in front of a woman I had just met. "Ridge Road's 2 miles east," Ruth said, gently in her voice. "Past the church. When the pavement runs out, you're on it. You'll walk right up on the place. Can't miss it. There's a big red barn set back from the road. Used to be red anyway. It's mostly gray now." "Thank you." "Silas." She put her hand on the counter. She did not put it on my hand. She just put it down on the counter near mine the way a person does when they're not sure if a touch will be welcome. "Your grandfather was a good man. I want you to hear me on that. I want you to hear me real good. Whatever you think about him, whatever you've heard, whatever it might look like from the outside, Walter Hayes was a good man." I nodded. I did not know what else to do. The walk to Ridge Road took 40 minutes. The pavement gave out about a mile in, and after that the road was just gravel and dust and the hum of insects in the high grass. The light kept fading. By the time I saw the barn, the western sky had gone deep purple, and the first stars were coming out over the eastern ridge. The barn sat about 100 feet back from the road, set in a clearing surrounded by tall scrub trees and overgrown weeds. The paint had been red once, now it was a soft, weathered gray with just a few stubborn flakes of red still clinging on along the eaves. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired back. One of the big main doors hung crooked on its hinges. The whole structure looked like it might lie down and give up at any minute. It looked worthless. It looked exactly like what Diane had told me it would be. For a long minute, I stood at the edge of the road and stared at it, and a hot, ugly wave of something rose up in my chest. Anger, grief, the exhausted, wrung-out feeling of having been lied to by every adult in your life. I had ridden a bus 6 hours for this. A pile of rotting wood at the end of a gravel road in the middle of nowhere. I almost turned around. I almost walked back to town and called Lorraine Albright and told her to draw up the papers. I almost did it. Then I remembered Ruth's face. That's my grandson. I pushed through the weeds. The grass was waist-high in places, and there were thorns hidden in it, and by the time I reached the front of the barn, my jeans were torn at the shins, and my hands were stinging. The big main doors were chained shut. A heavy padlock held the chain in place. The padlock was new. I noticed that immediately. The body of the lock was a clean, bright brass. It had not been weathered. It had not been beaten. It was a new lock on an old chain on an abandoned barn that nobody was supposed to care about. I stared at that new lock for a long time. Then I walked along the side of the building, brushing away ivy and tall grass, and I found a smaller door. A man-sized door half hidden behind a curtain of dead vines. The keyhole in the door was iron, old, pitted with rust. It was a keyhole made for a key like the one in my pocket. My hand was shaking when I pulled the key out. I did not let myself think about why. I slid the key into the lock. It did not want to turn. The lock was ancient. The mechanism inside it had not been worked in months, maybe years. I jiggled the key. I leaned my shoulder against the door. I whispered something that was halfway between a curse and a prayer. And then with a deep grating clunk that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears, the lock turned. I pushed the door open. The air that came out to meet me was cool, musty, heavy with the smell of old motor oil and sawdust and time itself. It smelled the way a church smells when nobody has been inside it for a long while. Quiet, sealed, waiting. I stepped inside. For a long moment, my eyes could not adjust. The barn was nearly black. The only light was the last purple smudge of dusk leaking in through the gaps in the wooden walls and through the open door behind me. I stood there blinking. I waited for the world to take shape. Then it did, and I forgot how to breathe. The barn was not a ruin. The barn was not abandoned. The barn was a cathedral. A massive workbench ran the entire length of one wall. Solid timber, a single piece dark with age and use. Above it, on pegboards hung tools, hundreds of them. Wrenches, hammers, chisels, mallets, files. Each tool had its own place. And around each tool on the pegboard, somebody had drawn a careful, faint outline in chalk, so that if any tool was missing, anybody could see at a single glance what was gone and exactly where it belonged. In the center of the room, hanging from a heavy chain hoist, was an engine block. A V8, massive, gleaming dully in the half-light like a great dark heart that had stopped beating but had never been allowed to rust. The chain that held it was thick and oiled. The hoist had been kept in good repair. Shelves along the back wall held jars, hundreds of jars, glass jars full of bolts and screws and washers and nuts, sorted by size, sorted by type, sorted by some other system that only one man in the world had ever fully understood. Each jar was labeled in a careful, slanted handwriting, the handwriting of a man who took his time. This was not a junk barn. This was a workshop. This was a man's lifetime of work. I walked slowly across the dirt floor. My boots sounded loud in the stillness. I touched the workbench. The wood was smooth under my fingers, smoother than glass in places where decades of forearms had rested and rubbed. There were nicks in it, Dark stains where oil had soaked in, faint pale rings where coffee cups had been set down 1,000 mornings in a row. It was a map of a man's life, a man I had never met, a man who had stood in this exact spot 10,000 times and made things and fixed things and lived a quiet, careful, patient life. A man whose blood was in mine. I took the key out of my pocket. I set it down on the workbench. I stood there in the dark and I let the silence press in on me. I had been told my whole life that I was nothing. I had been told my whole life that I came from nothing. I had been told 2 days ago by the only family I had left that the only thing left of my mother's people was a worthless pile of wood at the end of a gravel road in a town nobody had heard of. Diane had been wrong. I did not yet know how wrong. I had not yet read the letters. I had not yet found the locker. I had not yet learned about the water beneath my feet or the men who wanted it. I had not yet understood that a key can be a doorway and a barn can be a battlefield, and a stranger can be the truest family you have ever had. But standing there in the dark with my fingertips on a workbench, worn smooth by a grandfather I had never met, I understood one thing. Diane was wrong about the barn, and if she was wrong about the barn, she was wrong about me. I took a breath. It was the first full breath I had taken in 18 years. In the back corner of the barn, half hidden behind a stack of old tires, I go a smaller partitioned off space. A little office, a wooden desk, a single bare bulb hanging from a cord, and on the desk, sitting square in the middle, a heavy military green footlocker closed with 2 thick hasps and 2 padlocks. My heart began to beat very fast. I walked toward it. I did not know it then, but the man I was when I crossed that dirt floor was not the same man who would walk back out through that side door. The boy who had ridden a bus from Pittsburgh with 12.5 pounds in a canvas bag was about to be left behind in that barn forever. And what would walk out days from now would be something else. Something my grandfather had been waiting for. Something Ironwood Holdings had not counted on. Something the woman with the red lacquered nails could not have stopped, even if she had known what she had set in motion when she dropped that cold iron key into my open palm and called it worthless. I knelt down in front of the footlocker. I put my hand on the lid. It was warm. How a thing made of metal sitting in a coal barn at the end of a cold day in the hills of Pennsylvania could be warm to the touch, I cannot explain. But it was. It was warm the way a hand is warm, the way a heart is warm, the way home is warm even when you have never set foot in it before. I had come to Hollow Pine to look at a worthless piece of land. Instead, I had come home. And the man waiting for me, the man who would teach me, slowly, lesson by lesson, who I was and what I was made of, and what I was meant to do with the years in front of me, had been dead for 6 months. But he had left me a key, and he had left me a barn, and inside the barn, locked in a footlocker on a desk in the dark, he had left me everything else. I reached for the latches. The latches were heavy. I tried to lift them with my fingers. They would not move. The padlocks held them shut. 2 small, sturdy locks. Old, cheap. The kind you buy at a hardware store for $3 and forget about. I tugged on them. I twisted them. I searched the desk drawers for keys, and the drawers were empty, except for dried-up pens and rusted paper clips in a single brittle index card with a phone number on it that I would later have reason to remember. I sat back on my heels. I stared at the locker. I had come this far. I had ridden the bus. I had walked the gravel road. I had pushed through the thorns and turned the iron key. I had crossed the dark cathedral of my grandfather's life. And now I was going to be stopped by 2 padlocks I could buy in any town in America for less than the price of a sandwich. No. I stood up. I walked back out into the main barn. I looked along the workbench. My eyes found a heavy iron crowbar leaning against the bench. Black, pitted, honest. The kind of tool that was made to do exactly one thing and to do it for 50 years without complaint. I picked it up. It felt right in my hand. I want you to understand something. I had spent the last 2 years tiptoeing around Diane's house, making myself small, holding doors so they would not slam, washing my 1 cup so it would not sit in the sink. I had spent 2 years apologizing for taking up space, and now, with a crowbar in my hand and my dead grandfather's air in my lungs, something inside me was starting to stand up straight for the first time in my life. I went back to the office. I set the tip of the crowbar against the first hasp. I leaned my weight onto it. The metal cracked. The sound was loud and ugly in the holy quiet of that barn. It echoed off the rafters. A bird somewhere in the loft burst into the air and was gone. I waited, listened, heard nothing but my own breath. I set the crowbar against the second hasp. I leaned. The metal cracked. I let out a long breath I had not known I was holding. I lifted the lid. I do not know what I had expected. Money, maybe? Old photographs? A pistol? Some final melodramatic gift from a man who had not been able to give me anything in life and was making up for it in death. What I found was paper. Stacks and stacks of paper. Bundled neatly with twine, yellowed at the edges. Some of it was new. Some of it was 20 years old. There were file folders labeled in that careful slanted handwriting. There were maps. There were what looked like geological surveys with strange symbols and contour lines. There were photocopied letters with state seals at the top. There were cassette tapes in a small wooden box. And on top of it all, lying on the very top, was a single sealed envelope. My name was written on it. Silas, just that, Silas, in the same slanted hand that had labeled every jar of bolts in the workshop. The hand of a careful man, a patient man, a man who took his time. My fingers were not steady when I picked it up. I sat down in the wooden chair behind the desk. The chair creaked under my weight the way old wood does. The bare bulb above me was off. The only light was the last gray smudge of dusk coming through a small, dirty window, and I had to hold the letter close to read it. I broke the seal. There were several pages. I unfolded them. I read, "Silas, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you are a man. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for all the years between us. I am sorry for all the silence. I hope in time you can forgive an old man for choices he made that I am sure looked from the outside like indifference. I need you to know they were not. I need you to know what they were. That is why I am writing this letter. It is the only way I know how. I had to stop. I had to set the page down. I had to breathe through my nose, slow the way I used to when my mother was dying, and I did not want to cry in front of her. I picked the page back up. Your mother was the best part of me. Hannah was light. She was laughter. She saw the world not for what it was, but for what it could be. And that is a gift, Silas, and it is a curse, and she carried both. When she left this town to make her way in the city, I was proud of her. When she met your father and lost him too young, I grieved with her from a distance. When she met Robert, I was glad she had found a steady man. And when you were born, she sent me a photograph. A small boy in a blue blanket with a head of dark hair and your mother's eyes. She wrote on the back of the picture in her handwriting that always looked like it was running to keep up with her thoughts. She wrote, "Daddy, this is Silas. He has your stubborn chin. I keep that picture on the desk where you are sitting now. It is in the locker. It is the most valuable thing I own." I stopped reading. I dug through the stack of paper in the locker, gentle, careful, until I found a small manila envelope tucked between two folders. I opened it. There were a dozen photographs inside. The one on top was a small, square photograph of a baby in a blue blanket. The photograph had been handled. A lot. The corners were soft. The white border was smudged with the kind of dark smudges that come from a man's thumb pressing down on the same place day after day, year after year. I turned it over. My mother's handwriting was on the back, just as he had said. I put the photograph in my shirt pocket against my chest, and I went back to the letter. When she got sick, she asked me not to come. She did not want me to see her like that. She wanted me to remember her strong. It was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, honoring that wish. I sat on a porch in Pennsylvania and ate my heart out for 2 years while my only daughter died 8 hours away. After she passed, I wanted to come for you. I wanted nothing else in this world. I wanted to drive my truck down to Pittsburgh and put you in the passenger seat and bring you home and raise you in this barn the way her mother and I raised her. I almost did it, son. I almost did. I did not. And the reason I did not is the reason I am writing this letter. It is the reason there is a footlocker. It is the reason there is a key. The reason I stayed away was not that I did not love you. The reason I stayed away was to protect you. I need you to read those words again, Silas. I stayed away to protect you. Everything I did for the last 8 years of my life, I did for you. I need you to believe that. If you believe nothing else, believe that. I put my head down on the desk. I cried. I am not going to dress it up for you. I am not going to call it weeping or call it grieving or call it any of the soft words people use when they want to make crying sound dignified. I cried hard, ugly, with my forehead on a dusty wooden desk in a barn in the hills of Pennsylvania, with a dead man's handwriting under my elbow and a baby photograph of myself in my pocket. I cried for every year of my life that I had been told I was nothing, and every year of my life that I had believed it. I cried for my mother. I cried for Robert. I cried for Walter Hayes, the grandfather I would never meet, who had kept my picture on his desk and pressed his thumb to my face for 8 years and not come for me because of something I did not yet understand. I cried until I was empty. And when I was empty, I sat up and I wiped my face with the back of my hand, and I picked up the next page of the letter and I kept reading. Because Walter Hayes had not written a sad letter. Walter Hayes had written a battle plan. The next page was different. The careful, mournful tone of the first page was gone. What replaced it was something harder, something with edges. The handwriting got tighter, more deliberate, the way a man's handwriting tightens when he is writing about an enemy. Now I am going to tell you about the land. Our family has been on this acre for 110 years. My grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, was a well digger. He came up from West Virginia after the Civil War, and he settled in these hills because he could feel the water under them. He used to walk the fields with a forked stick of green willow in his hands and find water for any farmer who needed a well. They called men like him water witches in those days. He was not a witch. He was a man with patient feet and quiet hands who knew how to listen to a piece of ground. He taught my father, and my father taught me. We are a family that knows what is under our feet, Silas. Remember that. It is going to matter. About 15 years ago, a company called Ironwood Holdings began buying land in this county. They were quiet about it. They used different shell companies and different names so it would look like a series of unconnected sales. Old farms, old foreclosures, old men and old widows who did not have the energy to fight a piece of paper. The story they told around town was that they were planning a retirement community, Hollow Pine Senior Living, that kind of nonsense. But I knew the way my grandfather would have known that something was wrong about it. They were too aggressive. They were too quiet. They paid in cash. And the parcels they were buying did not make sense for housing. They were buying along a single long curving line that ran through the lowlands. A line that anybody who knew this country and what was under it would recognize the way you might recognize a face in a crowd. They were buying the aquifer. Silas, what is under your feet right now is one of the largest, deepest, purest underground water reserves in the eastern United States. It runs from the foot of Bear Mountain north under this county and out under the next two counties. The primary access point, the place where the water table comes nearest to the surface, the place where the rock above the water is thinnest and easiest to drill, is right here. Underneath this barn, your barn. I stopped reading. I looked up. I looked at the dark wooden floor of the office. I looked through the doorway out into the main barn at the engine block, hanging in the middle of the open space at the dirt floor underneath it, and I tried to imagine a sea of cold, dark waters sitting silent and forgotten beneath my feet. A sea older than the country I was standing in. A sea older than the family who had lived above it. I went back to the letter. They cannot have it, son. They want to build a bottling plant. They want to drain the aquifer at industrial speed and ship the water in plastic to drought states out west, where they can sell it back to thirsty cities for 100 times the cost of pumping it out of the ground. The math is in the folders below this one. So is the geology. So are the projections. They will make billions. And they will, in the process, dry every well in 3 counties. Every farm, every dairy, every ranch, every family that has been on this land for 100 years will have to leave because their water will be gone. Hollow Pine will become a ghost town. And no one in the world will be able to prove they did it on purpose, because they have lawyers and they have lobbyists and they have men in the state capitol who answer their phone calls. I tried Silas. God knows I tried. I hired a geologist with money I did not have. Dr. Holden Reeves, a good man, honest. He confirmed everything I suspected and he wrote a report. I took that report to the county, I took it to the state, I took it to the EPA. They told me the report was inconclusive. They told me the surveys did not show what I said they showed. They told me, in the language they always use when they are about to do nothing, that there were no grounds for action at this time. That was when Ironwood started to come for me. First, it was offers, reasonable ones. They got higher when I refused. Then it was the lawyers. They tried to have my property seized for back taxes I did not owe. They tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. They sent men out here in suits to walk around my land with clipboards and tell me that things would go easier on me if I just signed. Then it was last the threats. Quiet ones. Phone calls in the middle of the night. A man at the diner who sat too close to me and told me that old men sometimes have accidents in their workshops. A dead crow nailed to my fence post. All of this, Silas, was happening in the same years that your mother was dying. And then in the years after. If I had brought you here, son, if I had driven that truck down to Pittsburgh and brought you home like I wanted to, you would have been the leverage. You would have been the soft place they pushed on. They would have used you against me, and I knew it because they had already shown me what they were willing to do. You were 11 years old, 12, 13. The only thing in the world I had left of your mother, and the only way I could keep you safe from them was to keep you away from me. I had to choose, Silas. I had to choose between holding you in my arms and keeping you alive. I chose to keep you alive. I made that choice every morning for 8 years, and I am making it again today on the day I sit down to write this letter, knowing my heart is not what it once was. It's knowing the time is shorter than I would like. Whether I live to meet you or not, I knew this barn would meet you. I built it for that. Forgive me, son, if you can. I read the letter twice, then a third time, and the third time my hands were steadier because the boy who had walked into the barn was beginning to give way to whatever was going to walk out of it. I had spent 18 years thinking I had been abandoned by everyone in my mother's family. I had been wrong about that. I had spent 2 days thinking I had been handed a worthless piece of land as a final mocking goodbye. I had been wrong about that too. I had spent my whole life thinking I was the small, quiet, leftover boy who could be passed from house to house and left in shelters and dropped at bus stations because he was nobody and no one would notice. I was beginning to suspect sitting there in that desk chair that I had been wrong about that most of all. There was more in the locker. I dug. I pulled out the folders. I laid them across the desk. There were geological surveys with my grandfather's notes in the margins written in pencil in the same careful hand. There were photocopies of letters he had written to senators and congressmen in the governor's office and the polite, empty form letters he had received in reply. There were affidavits, sworn statements from his neighbors, old men and old women who had been pressured, harassed, threatened, and finally, one by one, broken into selling their land. There was a list of names, 12 names, each one a person who had refused to sell and then somehow it ended up selling anyway. Next to each name was a date. Next to some of the names were small, careful notations. House fire, no insurance, daughter lost job in city, sudden medical bill. Truck brakes failed, he recovered, sold 3 weeks later. I sat with that page for a long time. I understood what I was looking at. It was not a list of unfortunate coincidences. It was a list of warnings, 12 warnings. 12 different ways a corporation can take an acre of land away from a man who does not want to sell it when the corporation is patient and the man is alone. I was 18 years old. I had a duffel bag and $500. I had no family, no allies, no education past high school, no home, no plan. And I suddenly understood the next name on this list. I should have been afraid. I want to tell you I was. I think a smarter boy would have been. But what I felt sitting in that wooden chair with that list under my hands was not fear. What I felt was the slow, steady warming of a fire I had not known was inside me. Underneath the folders near the bottom of the locker, there was one more letter. Sealed, my name on it again. I opened it. It was shorter. Silas, if you are reading this, then you have read everything else. You know what is under our land, and you know who wants it. Now I am going to tell you something hard, and I am going to ask you to listen. You have a choice. The first choice is the easy one. You can take the offer from Ironwood, $4,500. Lorraine Albright is a decent person. She does not know any of what I have just told you. To her, this is a worthless acre, and you are a child, and she is doing her job by recommending the deal. You can sign the papers. You can take the money. You can walk away from this town and from this barn and from this fight and start your life clean somewhere else. No man in his right mind would blame you for it. I do not blame you for it. You owe me nothing. You owe this place nothing. You owe these people nothing. That choice is yours to make, and if you make it, I want you to make it without shame. The second choice is harder. The second choice is to stay. To stay means to fight. It means they will come for you the way they came for me. It means you will be alone the way I was alone. It means there will be nights you will be afraid. It means you may have to make decisions a young man should never have to make in a barn at the end of a gravel road without any family at your back to tell you what is right. But Silas, you will not be unarmed. Everything you need is in this locker. Everything I have spent 15 years gathering. And the rest of it, the piece I could not gather, the last piece I have hidden for you here in this workshop, where the heart of the work lives. If you choose to stay, you will find it. I have left you a trail to walk. Walk it. And know this, son, the town will help you. There are good people here. Ruth at the diner, Earl at the hardware store, old Mrs. Henley up on the ridge. They all knew me. They all loved your mother when she was a girl. If you ask them, they will stand with you. They were waiting for me to win. They will be willing to wait for you instead if you give them a reason. Whatever you decide, Silas, know that I am proud of you. Know that I love you. Know that you were never, ever for one single day of your life alone in this world. Walter. I sat with the letter in my lap. The barn was full of dark now. The window had gone black. A small wind had picked up outside. I could hear it pressing against the loose boards of the barn, low like an animal breathing. I thought about Pittsburgh. I thought about Diane and her red lacquered nails. I thought about a small studio apartment in some city I did not know, a job in a stockroom, a quiet life with money in the bank and no fight in it. That was the easy choice. That was the choice that almost any rational person would tell me to make. Then I thought about Ruth at the diner, about the way her hand had hovered near mine on the counter without touching it. Your grandfather was a good man. I thought about a baby photograph and a wallet pulled out late at night when the diner was empty. That's my grandson. I thought about my mother. I thought about a corporation that had spent 15 years grinding an old man down because he stood between them and a sea of water under the ground. I thought about being 18 and having nothing and standing at a fork in the road that I had not asked to find with a key in my pocket and a tool barn at my back. I knew before I had even finished thinking what I was going to do. I stood up. I folded the second letter and put it inside the manila envelope with the photographs. I closed the footlocker, gentle, the way you close a coffin you are not finished honoring. I took the iron key off the workbench and slid it back into my pocket. I walked out into the main barn. The engine block hung in the center of the room, motionless on its chain, a massive V8, greasy and silent and patient. The heart of the work my grandfather had written, where the heart of the work lives. I walked over to it. I put my hand on the cold metal of the block. I had never worked on an engine in my life. I had never owned a wrench. I had spent 18 years in a city in a small bedroom, in a stepfather's house, and the only tool I had ever held had been the small toy hammer Robert bought me when I was 9 years old. But standing there in the dark with my palm flat against an engine that had been hanging from a chain hoist in the middle of an empty barn for years waiting, I understood something. My grandfather had not hidden the last piece of the puzzle in a safe. He had not hidden it in a bank deposit box. He had not hidden it in a hole in the ground. He had hidden it inside the heart of the work. He had hidden it where only somebody who was willing to do the work could find it. He had hidden it from me. I walked over to the workbench. I scanned the rows of tools hanging on the pegboard. I did not know the names of all of them. I did not know what most of them were for, but I knew by the size of the bolts on the engine, the rough size of the wrench I would need. I found one. I took it down. The handle was worn. The grip on it was the grip of a man's right hand, dark with 1,000 days of use. I held it. It was heavy. It was honest. It felt like a thing that knew what it was for. I went back to the engine. I knelt down underneath it and looked up at the oil pan on the bottom. There were 10 bolts holding it in place. I set the wrench against the first one. It was tighter than I expected. I leaned. I grunted. My hands, which had spent 18 years holding nothing heavier than a pencil, screamed at me. The wrench slipped. I scraped the back of my knuckles. I tasted blood and dust and old motor oil. I set the wrench again. I leaned harder. The bolt moved. A quarter turn, then a half, then the bolt was loose enough to spin out by hand. I put the bolt down on the dirt floor next to me. I started on the second bolt. It moved easier, the third easier still. By the fifth bolt, my hands had started to learn something. They had started to find the right angle, the right pressure, the right leverage. By the eighth bolt, I was breathing in time with the work. By the 10th bolt, when the oil pan came loose in my hands and lowered careful and heavy into my lap, I was a different person than I had been 10 minutes earlier. I do not say that lightly. A man who has never used his hands to make something or fix something or take something carefully apart does not know who he is yet. He has not yet been told. He has only been told the things other people have told him about himself, which are more often than not lies. The first time you do real work with your hands, work that bites your knuckles and bruises your forearms, work that you have to think about with your whole body and not just your head, you find out something the world has been hiding from you. You find out you are stronger than they said you were. You find out you can do hard things. You find out in a small and quiet way who you are. I lowered the oil pan. I looked inside. It should have been empty. It would have been on any normal engine. But this engine was not normal. This engine was a hiding place. The oil pan had been wiped clean a long time ago, and there was no oil in the engine itself. The whole assembly was dry, dressed up to look like work, but holding nothing. Nothing except at this bottom, in the deepest curve of the pan, wrapped in a soft cloth that had once been white, a small flat metal box, a safe deposit box. Taped to the top of it was a small, modern numbered key. I lifted the box out slow, the way a man lifts something he knows is going to change his life. It was heavier than it looked. I carried it back to the desk in the office. I set it down in the small ring of light cast by the bare bulb, which I had finally turned on. I peeled the key off the lid. I slid the key into the lock. I turned it. The box opened. Inside were 3 things: a small handheld digital recorder, the kind a businessman might carry to record meetings. The little screen on the front was dark, but the battery indicator showed a faint glow when I pressed the power button. It worked. A stack of small cassette tapes, each one labeled in pencil with a date. 11 tapes. in a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. I unfolded the paper. It was a sworn affidavit, notarized, signed at the bottom in a neat small hand. Holden Reeves, Doctor of Geology, former Senior Environmental Consultant, Ironwood Holdings. I read the first paragraph. I had to set the paper down on the desk because my hands were shaking too badly to hold it. I read it again. I read it a third time. It was a confession, page after page of it, detailed, dated, specific. A man who had worked inside Ironwood Holdings for 6 years and who had been ordered on multiple occasions to falsify environmental reports. A man who had refused. A man who had been threatened. A man who had been fired. A man who had then quietly gone home, sat down at his kitchen table and written everything down and given the document to my grandfather. The tapes were his recordings of the meetings in which he had been threatened. His own voice, his boss's voices, dates, names, numbers. This was not just evidence. This was a smoking gun. This was the kind of document that ends a corporation. This was what my grandfather had died holding on to, waiting for somebody who could carry it the rest of the way. I sat in the wooden chair under the bare bulb with the affidavit in front of me and the 11 tapes lined up on the desk in the digital recorder humming faintly in my hand, and I understood that I had two choices. The first choice was to leave, take the affidavit, take the tapes, drive to a city with a federal building, hand the whole package to the FBI anonymously and walk away. I would survive. The land would be lost, probably. The aquifer would be drained, probably. Hollow Pine would die, but I would live, quiet and clean and small the way I had always lived. The second choice was to stand. To stand here, in this barn, on this acre, with these tapes and this affidavit and this signed confession in my hand. To stand the way Walter Hayes had stood for 15 years before he had run out of time. To stand and to not fall. I stood up. I walked to the doorway of the office. I leaned against the frame. I looked out into the dark cathedral of my grandfather's life. The workbench, the hanging tools, the empty engine over the empty oil pan on the dirt floor, the smell of cold metal and old wood. The key was still in my pocket. I could feel it. It was no longer cold. I took the prepaid phone out of my pocket. I dialed Lorraine Albright's number from memory. It rang twice. Albright and Associates. Miss Albright. Mr. Whitman, I'm rejecting the offer. There was a small, surprised pause on the line. Then she gathered herself in the way professional women do, and her voice came back smooth. Mr. Whitman, I understand impulses, but I would urge you to reconsider. You are 18 years old. You have very few resources. Ironwood Holdings is a large, well-funded company. They can outspend you on legal counsel by orders of magnitude. You would be entering a fight you cannot possibly win. I can win. On what grounds, Mr. Whitman? On the grounds that I have a sworn notarized affidavit from a former Ironwood geologist named Holden Reeves, in which he confesses in detail to 15 years of conspiracy to defraud the citizens of this county and to illegally appropriate public water resources. I have 11 cassette tapes of recorded meetings in his voice and in the voices of his superiors corroborating that affidavit. I have geological surveys they suppressed. I have a list of 12 people in this county they pressured, threatened, or forced into selling their land. I have my grandfather's correspondence with the state environmental agency who refused to act and the dates on which they refused. The line was quiet for a long time. When Lorraine Albright spoke again, the smoothness was gone. Her voice had dropped into a different register entirely, lower, sharper, wide awake. Mr. Whitman, yes. Where are you right now? At the barn. Do not move. Do not call anyone else. Do not speak to anyone in town about any of this. I am getting in my car. I will be there in 3 hours. She hung up. I stood in the doorway of the office and listened to the wind press against the old boards of the barn, And I waited for a woman I had only met once by phone to drive across the dark hills of Pennsylvania to meet a stranger she had been trying that morning to talk into a settlement. I waited, and while I waited, I went through everything in the locker and laid it all out across the workbench in careful, deliberate rows the way my grandfather had laid out his tools. A battle plan in the dark, an 18-year-old boy and the things a dead man had left him. The first soldier in a war that had been waiting patient and quiet for someone to finally come home and fight it. 3 hours is a long time to be alone with a dead man's evidence. I did not sleep. I did not eat. I sat on the dirt floor of that barn with my back against the workbench, and I went through every folder in the footlocker page by page until I knew the shape of the fight my grandfather had started. I learned things. I learned that Ironwood Holdings was a subsidiary of a larger holding company headquartered in Delaware, and that the larger holding company was in turn owned by a private equity fund whose investors included 2 former state senators. I learned that the chief executive of Ironwood was a man named Calvin Trask, who had been photographed at 3 different fundraisers with the current state attorney general. I learned that the Hollow Pine Senior Living Project, the supposed retirement community, had never filed for any of the permits a real retirement community would need. No water permits, no septic permits, no road permits, nothing. Because there was never going to be a retirement community. There were only going to be wells and pumps and trucks and a great long pipeline running west. I learned that my grandfather had been a meticulous man. Every threat he had received, he had written down. The date, the time, the man who delivered it, the exact words. There were 86 entries in a small, leather-bound notebook in his careful, slanted hand. 86. I closed that notebook. I sat with my hand on its cover for a long time. When the headlights came up the gravel road, I saw them through the gaps in the wall before I heard the engine. I stood. I walked to the side door. I waited. The car was a sensible gray sedan, the kind of car a paralegal drives. The headlights went out. The driver's door opened. A woman in her early 30s stepped out with a leather briefcase over her shoulder and her hair pulled back tight at the nape of her neck. She walked across the gravel with a clean, purposeful stride. She stopped a few feet from the door. She looked at me. I looked at her. Mr. Whitman, Miss Albright, may I come in? I stepped aside. Lorraine Albright walked into the barn, and her eyes did exactly what mine had done a few hours earlier. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at the workbench. She looked at the chalk outlines of the tools. She looked at the engine block hanging from its chain. She looked at the empty oil pan on the dirt floor, and she looked at the rows of paper laid out on the bench under the bare bulb's glow, and she stood there for almost a full minute without saying anything. Then she said quiet, "My God." She set her briefcase down. She walked to the workbench. She did not touch anything. She bent at the waist and read the affidavit on top, the way a doctor reads a chart, slow, careful, page by page. When she got to the 3rd page, she pulled up the wooden chair from the office and sat down. She kept reading. She did not look up. After a while, she opened her briefcase and took out a yellow legal pad and a pen, and she started taking notes. I sat on a sawhorse across from her. I did not interrupt her. She read for 2 hours. When she finally set the last page down, she put her pen on top of the legal pad and pressed her palms flat on the workbench on either side of the papers, like she needed the wood to hold her up. She looked across the bench at me. Her eyes were not the smooth, professional eyes that had been on the phone that morning. They were something else now. They were, I think, the eyes Lorraine Albright had when she was 22 years old and had just gotten out of law school and had thought for one bright minute that she was going to spend her life doing exactly this. Mr. Whitman, Silas, do you understand what you have here? Yes. Tell me. It's enough to end them. She nodded once slow. It is more than enough, she said. It is enough to make sure that no judge in this state, no jury in this country, no journalist with a pulse, and no agency with a phone number will be able to look the other way. It is enough to put men in prison. It is enough to undo 15 years of work they thought was buried. It is enough, Silas, to win. She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she was the paralegal again, the professional, the lawyer in training with a yellow pad and a plan. Tomorrow morning, she said, I file. What do you need from me? Your signature, your courage, and your patience. They're going to come at you, Silas, hard, faster than you can imagine. They will offer you money, then more money. Then they will threaten you. Then they will threaten the people you care about. Then they will try to discredit you. They will dig through every record of your life in Pittsburgh. They will find Diane. They will try to use her. Are you ready for that? Yes. You're sure? I'm sure. She studied me for a long moment. Why, she said. It was not a lawyer's question. It was a person's question. I looked past her at the bare bulb above the desk in the office, and I thought about my mother and about Robert and about a baby photograph kept in a wallet for 18 years. Because somebody has to, I said. Lorraine Albright nodded. She filed the next morning. The first offer came at lunchtime, $50,000. Lorraine called me at the diner where I was sitting in a corner booth eating eggs that Ruth would not let me pay for, and I told her to refuse it. The second offer came that afternoon, $100,000. I was on the roof of the barn at the time replacing a section of rotten shingles with new ones I had bought from Earl Bishop at the hardware store. Lorraine called my prepaid phone. I climbed down the ladder. I told her to refuse it. The third offer came the next morning, $250,000 plus immediate possession of the property and a no-fault non-disclosure agreement. Lorraine sounded almost amused on the phone. Refuse it, I said. I had a feeling you'd say that. Are they getting nervous? Silas, they are unraveling. That night the man came. I did not hear his car. He had parked it down the road. The first thing I heard was the side door of the barn opening slow, and then a man's footstep on the dirt floor. I had been sitting at my grandfather's desk reading through one of the thinner folders when I heard him. I stood up. I walked out of the office. I stopped at the edge of the lit area near the workbench. He was standing just inside the door. He was a heavy man in a black leather jacket with a face that had been lived in hard. He was not pointing a weapon at me. He did not need to. Silas Whitman, he said, that's me. You and I need to have a small conversation. All right? You are 18 years old. I am. You are alone. I am. You are sitting on a piece of land that very, very large men want very, very badly, and you are saying no to them. Yes. You should know, he said, that accidents happen out in the country. Old barns burn down. Boys fall off roofs. Trucks lose their brakes. The country is a dangerous place for a young man with no family. I looked at him. I want to tell you I was not afraid. That would be a lie. I was afraid. My hands were sweating. My heart was punching against my ribs. My mouth had gone dry. But I had spent 18 years being afraid, and I had spent the last week reading a dead man's words, and somewhere in those days a thing inside me had hardened that had not been hard before. I reached out calm, and I lifted a heavy iron wrench off the workbench. I did not raise it. I did not threaten him with it. I just held it easy the way a man holds a tool he knows what to do with. I looked him in the eyes. Get off my land, I said. The man in the black jacket smiled slow. He looked around the barn. He looked at the wrench in my hand. He looked at my face. And whatever he saw in my face, it must have been more than he had been told to expect, because the smile thinned and then it went away. You're Walter's grandson, all right, he said. He turned around. He walked out of the barn. I stood very still until I heard his car start far down the road. I stood very still until I could not hear it anymore. Then I sat down on the dirt floor of the barn with my back against the leg of the workbench, and I put my head between my knees and I shook for 10 full minutes before I could stand up again. But I had stood. I had stood, and the man had gone, and the barn was still mine. The second night I almost lost it all. I woke up to the smell of gasoline. The smell came in through the cracks in the wall of the office where I slept. It was sharp and wrong, and it had no business being there. I was up before I had time to think. I grabbed the wrench off the desk. I went through the main barn in a low crouch. I reached the side door. I pushed it open with the wrench slow. A young man was kneeling against the wall of the barn, a red plastic gas can tipped against the boards, the gasoline already darkening the old wood. He had a lighter in his hand. He had not flicked it yet. He looked up. He was my age, 18, maybe 19, skinny, pale, wearing a hooded sweatshirt that was 2 sizes too big. His eyes, when they met mine, were the eyes of a boy, not a man. They were scared. I did not raise the wrench. I lowered it. I sat down slow on the gravel about 10 feet from him. I set the wrench on the ground beside me. I put my hands on my knees, palms up. "What's your name?" I said. He did not answer. "What's your name?" I said again, gentle. "Wyatt." "How much they pay you, Wyatt?" He looked at the gas can. He looked at the lighter in his hand. He looked at me. $500, he said. "Why?" "My mom. She's sick. Cancer." I nodded. I sat with him in the gravel for a minute. The gas can sat between us, heavy with what it had almost been used for. The lighter sat in his hand unlit. "My mother died of cancer when I was 10, I said. He did not say anything. "It was the worst thing that ever happened to me," I said. "It is still the worst thing that ever happened to me. There is not anything in the world I would not have done when I was 10 years old to make the bills go away and the medicine come faster and her get better. I understand." He started to cry. I have never in my life heard a young man cry the way Wyatt cried that night. He did not weep. He keened. He made a small, high-breaking sound like a thing that had been held in for too long and had finally given way. He set the lighter on the gravel and he put his face into his hands and he shook. I let him. After a while, I stood up. I went to my duffel bag. I came back with $200. The last $200 I had in the world in cash. I held it out to him. "Take this," I said. "I can't." "Take it. Use it for your mom. Don't come back here. Don't take another job from these people. They are using you the same way they tried to use me." He looked at the money. "Why?" he said. "Because somebody told me once that whatever I think about my grandfather, he was a good man. I am trying very hard, Wyatt, to be a man who would have made him proud. Take the money." He took the money. He stood up. He picked up the gas can. He walked into the dark. I watched him go. I went back into the barn. I sat on the dirt floor. I put my forehead on my knees and I stayed there for a long time until the gray of morning began to find its way through the gaps in the wall, and a barn owl somewhere up in the rafters called once soft like a prayer for a boy who was learning to be a man. The town began to wake up to me after that. Ruth started coming out to the barn in the mornings in her old blue station wagon with a thermos of coffee and a paper bag of biscuits. She would not stay long. She would set the food on the workbench. She would touch the workbench gentle in the way you touch a place where someone you loved used to stand. She would say, "He'd be proud, you know," and she would go. Earl Bishop drove out one Saturday with a truck bed full of lumber. He did not knock. He just started unloading. When I came out, he gave me a long look from under the brim of his cap, and he said, "Roof's not gonna fix itself, son." He stayed all day. He showed me how to set rafters. He showed me how to drive a 16-penny nail in 3 swings. He did not charge me $1 for the lumber. When I tried to pay him, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said only, "Walter Hayes saved my farm in 1989. I'm just paying off the interest." He stayed for supper. He told me stories about my grandfather, stories my mother had never told me, stories nobody had ever told me, stories about a quiet man with steady hands who fixed every tractor in 3 counties and who never charged a widow more than the cost of the parts, stories about my mother as a girl riding in the cab of Walter's pickup truck with her legs swinging, eating an apple, laughing. I sat at my own kitchen table in my own barn on my own land, and I listened to a stranger tell me about the family I had been told I did not have. It was the next afternoon when Earl had gone home for the day, and the light was getting long across the gravel yard that I climbed back up onto the roof to finish the section we had not gotten to. I was on my knees, prying out a rotted board near the eave when I felt my screwdriver hit something that was not wood, something that gave a little, something hollow. I sat back on my heels. I worked the rotted board free. I leaned in. I could see in the dim space between the rafter and the underside of the next plank a small, dark shape wrapped in oilcloth. I pulled it out slow. It was a book. A leather-bound notebook smaller than the one in the footlocker. Older. The leather was soft and dark with handling. There was no name on the cover. There was only a small, deep groove where a man's thumb had rested 10,000 times in the same place. I climbed down off the roof. I sat on the workbench under the bare bulb in the office, and I opened the notebook. It was a journal. 8 years of one. Walter's handwriting in pencil, dated entry by entry, sometimes a line, sometimes at a page. The fight against Ironwood day by quiet day. The phone calls, the visits, the small humiliations. Dr. Reeves's first report, the state's first dismissal, the dead crow on the fence, the night the kitchen window was broken and nothing taken. The week his hands started to shake on the worst days. The month his heart began to skip. But the journal was not only about the fight, it was also about me. There were entries scattered through the years that had nothing to do with Ironwood. Short ones, a line, 2 lines, sometimes 3. Hannah's boy turned 11 today. I drove past the school in the city. I did not stop. I saw him through the fence. He was tall. Hannah's boy turned 13 today. Robert sent a card from him at Christmas, just a signature. The handwriting is hers. Hannah's boy turned 15. The man at the diner came again last night. They are getting closer. I cannot bring him here. I cannot. Hannah's boy turned 17. 1 year, 1 more year, and they cannot use him against me anymore. Hold on, old man. I read it slow. I read it all the way through. The last entry was dated 3 days before he died. The handwriting was thinner than the rest. The pencil had been pressed light the way an old man's hand presses light when his strength is going. If I do not finish this, Silas will. He has Hayes blood in him. Hayes blood does not run from a fight. I have not held him in my arms. I have not taught him a single thing about a wrench or a piece of land or what it means to be a man who keeps his word. But I know him. I have looked at his face every morning in a photograph for 18 years, and I know him. He will come. He will read what I have left for him. He will pick it up where I had to set it down. I believe in my grandson. I believe in the boy I have never met. Walter Hayes. I closed the notebook. I sat in the dark of the barn for a long time with my hand resting on its cover. I had spent 18 years thinking nobody had ever believed in me. I had been wrong about that too. I put the journal in the desk drawer of the office where my grandfather had kept his most private things because that was where it belonged. And then I walked back out into the main barn and I picked up Earl's hammer where he had left it on the workbench, and I climbed back up onto the roof and I worked until the stars came out because I had a fight to finish and a roof to fix and a Hayes name to live up to, and the only way to do any of those things was to use my hands. Things began to move quickly after that. The story broke in the regional paper first. Lorraine had been quietly feeding the documents to a young reporter named Beth Caldwell, who had been laid off from a city paper and had moved back home to her parents' farm and had been for 2 years looking for the story that would put her back on the map. We gave it to her. She wrote it. The headline ran across the top of the Sunday edition in letters 2 inches tall. Barn Boy versus the Water Company. The story got picked up by the statewide chain on Monday. By Tuesday, it was on the regional news at 6 o'clock. By Wednesday, a national network had a producer on the phone with Lorraine asking if I would come to New York to be interviewed. Lorraine told them I would not be coming to New York. Lorraine told them that if they wanted to interview me, they could send a crew to a tool barn at the end of a gravel road in Hollow Pine, Pennsylvania, and that I would speak to them on the steps of the courthouse, where the lawsuit would soon be filed and not before. They came. 2 news vans, 3 reporters. A small crowd of townspeople gathered on the courthouse steps. Ruth was there. Earl was there. Old Mrs. Henley from the Ridge was there in a wool coat that had seen 40 winters, leaning on a cane. I stood at the top of the steps in clean jeans and a clean shirt with my grandfather's iron wrench in my right hand because it felt right to have it there, and because it felt right that the cameras would see it. Lorraine stood at my shoulder. She gave the legal statement first. She named Ironwood Holdings. She named Calvin Trask. She named the figures and the dates and the violations. She spoke for 4 minutes, clean, hard, and final. Then she stepped back and she looked at me. I had not planned what I was going to say. I had thought about it for 2 days and I had written nothing down, and I had decided in the truck on the way to the courthouse that I would say whatever came when I opened my mouth. I opened my mouth. My name is Silas Whitman. I lifted the wrench just a little. I let the sun catch it. I am 18 years old. 6 weeks ago, my stepmother gave me a key and a bus ticket and told me that I had inherited a worthless tool barn from a grandfather I had never met. I came up here to look at the place before I sold it. I paused. I'm not selling it. A small sound went through the crowd. Some of the older men took their caps off. My grandfather, Walter Hayes, spent the last 15 years of his life trying to stop the company that's been buying up this county. He wasn't a rich man. He didn't have lawyers. He didn't have lobbyists. He had a barn and a footlocker and a notebook with 86 threats written down inside it. He died 6 months ago, and they thought that was the end of it. I lifted the wrench higher. It isn't the end of it. I took a breath. My grandfather wasn't a rich man, but he left me something more valuable than money. He left me a reason to stand up. That's what I want every kid out there watching this, every kid who's been told they're nothing, every kid who's been told they came from nothing to hear it today. Sometimes the people who love you don't get to tell you, so while you're alive to hear it, sometimes they tell you in a barn at the end of a gravel road 20 years after the fact. But it counts just the same. It counts. And what you do next with that knowledge counts even more. I lowered the wrench. That's all I have to say. I walked down the steps. The cameras followed me. I did not turn around. The story exploded the next morning. Ironwood Holdings stock dropped 17% by the closing bell. The state attorney general, who could read a room as well as the next political animal, announced a formal investigation by the end of the week. A federal environmental task force opened a parallel inquiry. 2 of Ironwood's outside counsel quietly resigned. Calvin Trask did not appear in public for 6 straight days. Then Holden Reeves disappeared. Lorraine called me at 5 in the morning. She said, "He's gone, Silas." Gone how? His landlady called me. He didn't come home last night. His car is still in the driveway. His apartment is empty. Clothes still in the closet. Toothbrush still in the bathroom. He just walked out. They got to him. Maybe. Or maybe he ran on his own. He's been scared for months. Either way, without him on the stand, the affidavit is weakened. We have the tapes, but a live witness is worth 10 tapes, especially when the other side will try to argue that the tapes were doctored. Where would he go? I don't know. He's from Ohio originally. There's a sister in Toledo, a college friend in Cleveland, a few old colleagues scattered around. I have an investigator on it, but it'll take days. I don't have days. Silas, I'll find him. I drove that morning in my grandfather's old Ford F-100, the one I had been getting back into running condition under Earl's eye for the last 3 weeks. The truck was a 1972 dark green with a dented hood and an engine that purred when you knew how to listen to it. I had timing belted it myself. I had replaced the carburetor myself. I had learned how to do those things from the manual on the workbench and from Earl's slow, patient corrections. And the first time the engine turned over and held a steady idle, I had laughed out loud in the empty barn for the first time in years. I drove west. I drove all that day, and I drove most of the night. I stopped twice for gas. I called a sister in Toledo from a payphone outside a truck stop in Ohio. She had not heard from him. I called the college friend in Cleveland. He had not heard from him either, but he gave me a third name. A man named Pete Marsden, lived in a small town outside Akron, had been in graduate school with Holden a long time ago. Holden trusted him. I drove to Akron. I found Pete Marsden's house. I knocked on the door at 6:30 in the morning. Pete Marsden was a thin-bearded man in pajamas and reading glasses, and he looked at me through the screen door for a long minute before he said, "You're him, aren't you?" "I am." "He's in the back room." Holden Reeves was sitting at a kitchen table in a borrowed bathrobe with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and his face was the face of a man who had not slept in 2 days. He looked up when I came in. He started to stand. I motioned for him to sit. I sat down across from him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Dr. Reeves," I said. "They were going to kill me," he said. "I saw a car outside my apartment. 2 men sitting, watching. I went out the back. You did the right thing." I should never have written that affidavit. I looked at him. I thought for a long second about my grandfather. I thought about a man sitting in the same barn in his own kitchen, with his own coffee, with his own fear alone for 15 years. "Dr. Reeves," I said, "I'm not here to tell you that you have to come back. I'm not here to talk you into a witness stand. I'm not here to make a speech about civic duty or doing the right thing. I'm not your lawyer. I'm not the FBI. I'm just a kid who inherited a barn." He looked up. "My mother died of cancer when I was 10 years old," I said. "My grandfather, the man who left me that barn, spent the last 15 years of his life fighting these people. He died 6 months ago, alone, in a hospital bed, 3 counties away from anybody who loved him. He died because he was carrying this fight by himself and his heart wasn't strong enough for it, and there was nobody to help him carry it." I put my hand flat on the kitchen table. "You helped him, Dr. Reeves. You wrote the affidavit. You made the tapes. You did a brave thing 4 years ago when most men would have taken the severance package and signed the non-disclosure and walked away. You are a good man. You have been a good man. I am not asking you to go back into the world for the law, or for the state, or for the company. I am asking you to come back for him, for Walter, who carried your words inside an oil pan in a barn for 4 years because he believed you and because he was waiting for somebody to come and finish what you and he started together." He started to cry. A man crying at a kitchen table at 6 in the morning, in a borrowed bathrobe in a stranger's house in Ohio, is one of the most private things in the world. I did not look away from him. I did not pretend not to see. I sat with him until he was finished. And when he was finished, he wiped his face on the sleeve of the bathrobe and he looked up at me and he said, "All right." He came back with me. I drove him east in the green Ford F-100 all the long way back through the Ohio dark, and the sun came up over the Pennsylvania hills as we crossed the state line, and Holden Reeves sat in the passenger seat with his hands folded in his lap and watched the country go by. And after a while he said soft, "Your grandfather sounds like he was a good man." He was. I wish I had known him better. "Me too," I said. The day before the trial was set to begin, Ironwood Holdings folded. They folded big. They folded loud. Their lead counsel sent a 40-page settlement document over to Lorraine's office at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and by 6 o'clock that evening, the basic terms had leaked to every news desk in the state. A multi-million-dollar restitution fund for the town of Hollow Pine. A permanent court-enforced injunction surrendering all water and mineral rights in the county. An admission of harassment and interference. 3 executives, including Calvin Trask, to face separate criminal charges from the state attorney general's office. And a private settlement with me. I cannot tell you the number. Lorraine made me sign a confidentiality clause for that part, and a confidentiality clause is the only part of any of this that I have honored to the letter. I will say only this. It was enough that I will never for the rest of my life have to worry about money. It was also I understood the moment I saw the figure on the page, not the point. 2 days after the settlement was announced, Diane came. I had not heard from her since the day she had dropped the iron key into my palm. 6 weeks. She had not called. She had not written. I had read her name in 2 of the news stories and a short paragraph about my background, but she had not surfaced. She drove a small white car that was not her usual car. Her usual car was a leased luxury sedan. This was a rental. I noticed it before I noticed her. She got out of the car. She did not have her nails done. That was the first thing I saw. Her nails were short and unpainted. Her hair was pulled back simple. She wore a sweater that was a year out of fashion. She looked for the first time in the 8 years I had known her like a woman in her late 40s instead of a woman pretending to be something else. She walked to the door of the barn. She stopped about 10 feet from where I was standing. Silas? Diane. She looked at the barn. She looked back at me. I read the papers, she said. I figured. Robert wrote me a letter. What? Before he died. He wrote me a letter. He left it in the safe deposit box at the bank. I found it 3 weeks after the funeral. He wrote it the year before he died when the chest pain started. He told me in the letter that if anything happened to him, I was to take care of you, to raise you if I had to love you. He said in the letter that you were his son in every way that counted and that he was asking me to be your mother in every way that counted after he was gone. She stopped. She was not crying. She was looking at the dirt at her feet. I burned the letter, she said. I read it once and I put it in the kitchen sink and I lit it with a match and I watched it turn black and then I ran the water and washed it down the drain. And I went on with my life. I spent his savings on things I did not need. I bought clothes. I went on trips. I had my nails done every 2 weeks. I waited for you to turn 18. And then I gave you a key and a bus ticket and I locked my bedroom door and I let you walk out of my house and I told myself I had done my duty. I did not say anything. I didn't come for money, Silas. I came because I needed to say that out loud to someone, and the only person who has the right to hear it is you. I did Robert wrong. I did him a wrong I cannot ever take back. He was a good man, the best man I ever knew. And I burned his last words to me because I did not want the responsibility of loving you. Because I had never loved you. Because I had been jealous of you and your mother for the whole time I knew him, and I did not have the strength of character to set that down. She finally looked at me. I am sorry, she said. I do not expect you to forgive me. I would not if I were you. I just wanted you to know. I stood in the doorway of the barn for a long second. Then I turned. I walked back into the office. I opened the footlocker. I took out the manila envelope of photographs. I looked through them until I found the one I wanted. A small color photograph taken at a wedding of Robert and my mother and an 8-year-old me. Robert had his arm around my shoulders. He was laughing. My mother was looking at him, not at the camera, with the soft, small smile that women save for the men they love. I walked back out. I held the photograph out to Diane. This is the man you forgot, I said. Wait this. Look at it sometimes. Try to remember him better than I have to. Her hand was shaking when she took the photograph. Don't come back, Diane. She nodded. She got in the rental car. She drove away. I never saw her again. The Hayes Community Workshop opened on a Saturday morning in the first week of October. The barn had been painted. Earl Bishop and 3 of his cousins had spent 2 weekends with rollers and a ladder, and the whole structure was now a deep, clean red, the color it had been a long, long time ago, when my great-grandfather had built it. The sagging part of the roof had been fixed. The big main doors had been rehung straight. The chain hoist had been oiled. The V8 engine had been remounted on a steel stand against the north wall, where it gleamed under a row of hanging shop lights. A new sign hung over the side door, the door with the iron lock that still took the iron key. Hayes Community Workshop, where broken things become whole again. The morning of the opening, 7 boys arrived in a small white van from a foster youth program in Pittsburgh. They were between the ages of 12 and 17. They came down out of the van quiet and a little stiff, and they stood in the gravel lot with their hands in their pockets, and they did not know where to look. I knew exactly what they were feeling. I had been them 8 weeks earlier on this same patch of gravel. Wyatt was there in clean coveralls. He had been working with me at the barn for a month. He was sober. He was eating. His mother had finished her treatment, and the news from her doctor was good. He was the first apprentice I had ever taken on, and he was about to be the first apprentice instructor. Ruth was there with 3 pies on the long folding table she had set up by the door. Earl was there in a clean cap with his cousins and a small brass band of older men from the local Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall who had volunteered to play a few songs to mark the occasion. Lorraine Albright was there in jeans for the first time since I had met her with a husband I had not known she had, and a small daughter holding her hand. And Holden Reeves was there. He was teaching the geology class 2 afternoons a week. The boys would learn before they left this place what was under their feet. Because everybody my grandfather had once written deserves to know what is under their feet. I walked to the front of the gravel lot. I stopped in front of the 7 boys from the van. I looked at them one at a time. Some of them met my eyes. Some of them looked at the dirt. "My name is Silas Whitman," I said. "I'm 18 years old. 3 months ago, I owned exactly 12.5 pounds of belongings in a canvas bag. I had no family. I had no home. I had no plan. I was told my whole life that I was nothing, and I had begun slowly to believe it." I lifted my hand. I had a wrench in it, the same wrench. "This barn," I said, "saved my life, not because of what was in it, but because of what it taught me to do with my hands. We are going to spend the next year teaching you the same thing. We are going to teach you to fix engines. We are going to teach you to build cabinets. We are going to teach you to weld and to wire and to hang a door so it closes square. We are going to teach you slowly by the work of your hands that you are not nothing. You never were. They lied to you. They lied to me too. And the way we answer that lie, the only way I ever found, is to pick up a tool and to use it until the thing in front of us that was broken is whole again." I lowered the wrench. "Welcome to the workshop, boys." I walked over to the engine block. I had wired it up that morning with a small starter battery and a temporary fuel line and a switch I had built myself out of parts from one of the jars on the shelf. The boys followed me, slow, curious. The whole crowd gathered around. Ruth was crying without making a sound. Earl had his cap in his hands. I put my hand on the switch. I looked across the barn at the workbench, at the chalk outlines of the tools at the desk in the office where I had once sat and read a letter that had rewritten my life. Walter, I thought. I came home. I flipped the switch. The Vate turned over. It coughed once the way a cold engine coughs, and then it caught, and a deep, throaty rumble filled the barn, a sound that had not been heard inside those walls in over 10 years. The boys jumped. Then they laughed. Then they stepped closer, drawn by it, the way men have been drawn to good engines and good fires and good work since the beginning of time. I let the engine run for 10 full seconds. Then I shut it off. The silence after was not the empty silence I had walked into 8 weeks before. It was a full silence. A workshop silence, the kind of silence that sits inside a place where work is going to be done. I turned to the 7 boys. I rolled up my sleeves. "All right, gentlemen," I said, "let's get to work." That is the end of the story I came here to tell you. A woman with red lacquered nails told me on my 18th birthday that I had inherited a worthless tool barn. She was wrong about the barn. She was wrong about the land. She was wrong about everything she had ever told me about who I was and what I was worth. The barn was not worthless. Neither was I. Neither, my friend, are you. If you have ever been told you came from nothing, if you have ever been handed a small cold thing and told it was the sum of your worth, if you have ever stood at a fork in a road on a Tuesday afternoon with a duffel bag at your feet and wondered if anybody in this world had ever seen you or known you or loved you, Somebody did. Somebody does. And sometimes the proof of it is not a photograph or a phone call or a kitchen full of warm light. Sometimes the proof of it is a key, a rusted, ornate, ordinary key, slipped into your hand by someone who does not love you on behalf of someone somewhere at some time who did. Pick up the key, get on the bus, walk the gravel road, open the door. The barn is waiting, so is the man you are meant to be.